As a child, thanks to stories like Frosty the Snowman, I would always thought how awesome it would be to build a snowman and have a best friend for winter. I mean, sure, it would be sad to see him go once the snow melted, but that's the beauty of a child's imagination, right? It's not real, so you don't have to worry about trivial things such as that. Also, it's just a fictional movie, right? Snowmen don't actually come to life. Or at least so I thought. Last winter brought about one hell of a nasty snowstorm. Our sleepy little town got snow every year, but this year was the first time that caused businesses to shut down until the storm had passed. Kids were told not to go to school, and us adults had to stay home from work for fear of someone getting stuck and buried. That's how bad it was. After I got the call from my boss about not having to show up for work for the day, I excitedly threw on my sweatpants, and I began making a pot of coffee from my Keurig. I lived by myself in a house that looked more like a small cabin just on the outskirts of town. Well, I guess I wasn't completely alone. I was with my Cocker Spaniel and miniature poodle mix, Annie, to keep me company. She stood by my side as I made my coffee, excited for the possibility of food dropping on the floor, even though I wasn't preparing any. Annie definitely made my broom and mop useless when I came to making a mess in the kitchen. Less work for me, I suppose. Once my coffee finished brewing, I made my way to the couch to see what movies I could find on Netflix, so long as the weather didn't tarnish my Wi-Fi signal yet. If that failed, I figured that I would cozy up and read one of the many books I've collected from the thrift store shopping. As I walked by my dining room window, I noticed something move out of the corner of my eye. I would have dismissed it as the falling snow from the storm, but this moved in the opposite direction of the snow. I looked out and I saw nothing. Just my snow-covered front yard and my Chevy pickup slowly disappearing under the snow. Man, it's falling really heavy out there. I reckon I'll have to call in for work if my truck goes any deeper, I thought as I continued over to the couch. Well, Annie, I spoke to my dog as she began making herself comfortable on her bed next to the fireplace. Looks like it's just me and you against the storm, baby girl. As if it wasn't just her and I all the time. I wasn't very much into socializing. I mean, I've made some friends here and there, but overall I tend to keep to myself. It makes life simpler that way. I've dated here and there, but all of the guys I met were intent on staying in the city, and they were too self-centered to care about anybody else. I turned on the TV and surprise, no connection. Well, I thought out loud to Annie, no Netflix for us tonight. I started to make my way towards the bookshelf, when a tall figure standing outside my front living room window caught my attention. This was still pretty early, so I could still see partially well considering the snowstorm blurring things that were far away. I focused on the thing in my front yard, and I saw a snowman. Okay, how did that get there? Thinking out loud to Annie again. She simply perked her ears up because I was speaking to her, but didn't appear to be interested in what I was looking at outside. Surely she would have noticed someone creeping around my property, right? Yet again, with the snow falling so heavy outside, I'm sure a lot of scents and sounds are muffled enough that she can't even hear them. If it wasn't already obvious, I had no interest in building a snowman once the snow started to fall. Not only did I not have the material for it yet, but the snow was falling so heavy from the get-go that there is no way I was going to be outdoors. I just simply shrugged it off and I thought, must be some crazy teens with nothing better to do than creep me out tonight. And then I continued onto my bookshelf to select a book to read. I have already read through my Stephen King collection, except for one, It. Personally, I had been saving this one for last anyways, because of how large of a read it was going to be. But now I had all the time in the world to get started on it, and if this storm keeps up, I might be able to make a pretty good dent in it. Once I grabbed my book, I began making my way back to the couch. I looked out at the snowman again, half expecting it to be part of my imagination and not even be there. Not only was it still there, I swear that it looked like it was closer. This caused me to stop dead in my tracks. I began looking back into my memory bank, trying to remember how far away the damn thing had actually been the first time. I actually didn't take much notice to everything surrounding the snowman, so I didn't have a particular mark to compare it to. However, I just noticed so much more detail than I had before. I could actually see the features of the snowman's face much clearer, and I even noticed what looked like a reddish spot near the corners of its coal-made mouth. It was wearing a green scarf and a top hat, much like what Frosty the Snowman would be wearing, and it had a carrot for a nose. In its twig hand, I noticed it was curled around something that had a little bit of a shine to it, but I couldn't see it very well. Overall, the sight of the thing was really creeping me out. Thinking that I might need to call the police, I walk over to my phone that was charging on the counter. Of course, 0 bars. Great, I said aloud. And then I heard Annie begin to growl. This wasn't very typical of her. Even when other animals or people walk out of my property, she doesn't pay them any attention. I looked towards the window again. The snowman was now at my window. I could now notice the red color around its lips looked a lot more like blood. How could that be? First of all, snowmen can't even open their mouths. And secondly, there is no way a snowman could actually come to life. Right? Questions were rushing through my head faster than I could find answers, and I began to question my sanity over the situation when the snowman raised his hand holding the shiny object. This completely set me over the edge. I could now see that the shiny object was actually a knife. I panicked. I grabbed my dog and I sprinted towards my bedroom, and I locked the door. At this point, I just broke down in tears. I was actually a little glad I couldn't call the police. How in the hell do I explain to an operator that a live snowman was threatening my life with a knife? The operator would have hung up on me for sure. Hell, I don't even believe what's happening right now. I keep trying to tell myself that it's not real, while at the same time trying to reassure myself that my cabin has been kept warm by a fire all night. So even if this thing broke in, he would begin melting immediately. Well, so I thought. Before I could even complete processing my situation, I heard a loud crash and glass being broken. Shit, I thought, and panic overtook me once again. I put Annie on my bed and I rushed to my dresser. With all my might, I forced it over to my bedroom door, hoping the snowman wasn't strong enough to break down doors. Annie began growling again as I saw the doorknob twist and turn, unable to open due to the fact that it was locked. I looked down at the floor and I noticed a puddle beginning to form under the dresser, a sure sign that the snowman was in fact right in front of my door. I cupped my hands over my mouth in an attempt to stifle my cries and heavy breathing, and I jumped on my bed. 3 loud bangs. I screamed as the snowman began to bang what I assumed to be the knife on my door. My heart felt as if it would pound straight out of my chest, and I let out the loudest scream I think I have ever let out of my mouth. I truly thought that I was about to die. Fear had completely overtaken me, and I was frozen on my bed, unable to move and barely breathe. Finally, the banging stopped. I tried my best to calm myself down and to focus on listening over the sounds of my heart pounding in my chest. A few moments passed by, and finally I could hear the sound of something shuffling across my wood floor. Not footsteps, but more of the sound something would make as you dragged it across the floor. I continued listening as the sound became more distant, until finally I heard my front door open, but it never shut. I looked over at Annie, who had ceased growling and her body slowly became more relaxed. Seeing this calmed my nerves a little. However, I was still too frightened to dare open my door and look outside. As I lay there, now cold thanks to the fact that the fire in my fireplace was beginning to run low, I eventually let sleep overtake me. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing in the distance. I also couldn't help but notice how eerily silent it was due to the snow no longer falling outside. Cautiously, I moved the dresser away from my bedroom door, and I slowly opened it. I stood there for what felt like an hour, listening and focusing on any movement coming from the front of my house. Once I felt like it was safe, I began making my way to the kitchen, where I had left my phone. On the counter, next to where my phone sat as if I had left it, was a knife, covered in blood. I froze in place and looked around once more. I saw the shattered window and the front door left wide open. A track of ice leading from my bedroom to the front door. How I managed not to slip on it while making my way out here was a miracle to me. Once I managed to convince my body to move again, I made my way towards the bloody knife. Under it was a note. On it was what looked like child's handwriting in a red coloring crayon. It read, "Next time." Just as I had finished reading the note, my phone rang again. I was in such a trance that the ringing made me jump back in fright, and I dropped the note on the counter once more. I looked at the caller ID and I noticed it was my boss calling me. I picked up, and he simply wanted to let me know that it looked like there was going to be another storm tonight, so he was giving us another day off of work. I thanked him and I hung up the phone with my now shaking hand. Dread overcame me. I immediately called our local handyman and I asked if he was working today. Thankfully he was, and he said he would have time in a couple of hours to come by and fix my window. I also asked him to bring supplies to have a deadbolt installed on my door, and offered to pay extra for the strongest glass he could find. I could tell that he wanted to question my odd request, but he decided against it. And then I trudged my way through the snow, finding the blowtorch I had kept after my father passed away. He was a welder, and this was the last thing that I had from him. I needed to prepare myself in case the snowman decided to return, and finish the job that he couldn't complete last night. Needless to say, after this winter, I was never building a snowman again.